We are continuing to read The Hobbit. I am reading this version by Ballantine Fantasy. Not sure what year it was published, but I finished on page 60, chapter 3, A Short Rest, where they had arrived at Rivendell and they came to the Homely House. I didn't know that was the name of where the elves lived. One thing I wanted to go back and annotate is at the end of chapter 2, when Thorin is asking Gandalf, where were you? Basically, why weren't you here? Gandalf said, well, I rode to look ahead. And he said, and what brought you back in time? And he said, looking behind. I don't know why I like that quote, but I like that quote as just kind of a preparedness for yourself. And I guess assessing where you need to be and what you need to be doing is what it makes me think of. And so we've met a couple of groups of people now in Tolkien's universe. So there are the hobbits, there's Gandalf, who's in a class by himself, there's the dwarves, and there's trolls. And they're all various sizes and capabilities, which I think is very cool. So they've at last arrived at Homely House, and the doors are open for them. So I'm on page 60. It says, now it is a strange thing, but things that are good to have and days that are good to spend are soon told about and not much listened to, while things that are uncomfortable, palpitating, and even gruesome may make a good tale and take a deal of telling anyway. They stayed long in that good house, 14 days at least, and they found it hard to leave. Bilbo would gladly have stopped there forever and ever, probably the most like his hobbit hole. But supposing a wish would have taken him right back to his hobbit hole without trouble. Yet there is little to tell about their stay. So it was a good time. It was a relaxing time. They were kind of in this melancholy, traveling along with very few provisions, very little to eat before. The master of the house was an elf friend, one of those people whose fathers came into the strange stories before the beginning of history, the wars of the evil goblins and the elves and the first men in the north. In those days of our tale, there were still some people who had both elves and heroes of the north for ancestors, and Ellenrod, the master of the house, was their chief. He was as noble and as fair in the face as an elf lord, as strong as a warrior, as wise as a wizard, as venerable as a king of dwarves, and as kind as summer. He comes into many tales, but his part in the story of Bilbo's great adventure is only a small one, though important, as you will see if we ever get to the end of it. His house was perfect. Whether you liked food or sleep or work or storytelling or singing or just sitting and thinking best, or a pleasant mixture of them all, evil things did not come into that valley. I wish I had time to tell you even a few of the tales or one or two of the songs that they heard in that house. All of them, the ponies as well, grew refreshed and strong in a few days there. Their clothes were mended as well as their bruises, their tempers, and their hopes. Their bags were filled with food and provisions, light to carry but strong to bring them over the mountain passes. Their plans were improved with the best advice. So the time came to Midsummer Eve, and they were to go on again with the early sun on midsummer morning. Ellenrod knew all about runes of every kind. That day he looked at the swords they had brought from the troll's lair, and he said, "These are not troll make. They are old swords, very old swords of the high elves of the west, my kin. They were made in Gondolin for the goblin wars. They must have come from a dragon's horde or goblin plunder, for dragons and goblins destroyed that city many ages ago. This, Thorin, the runes named Orcrist, the goblin cleaver, in the ancient tongue of Gondolin, it was a famous blade. This, Gandalf, was Glamdrig, foe hammer, that the king of Gondolin once wore. Keep them well." So Thorin's sword is a famous blade from a person named Orcrist, the goblin cleaver. And Gandalf's sword is called Glamdrig, foe hammer, that a king of Gondolin once wore. "Whence did the trolls get them, I wonder," said Thorin, looking at his sword with new interest. "I could not say," said Ellenrod, "but one may guess that your trolls had plundered other plunderers, or come on the remnants of old robberies in some hold in some mountains of the north. I have heard that there are still forgotten treasures of old to be found in the deserted caverns of the mines of Moria, since the dwarf and goblin war." Thorin pondered these words. "I will keep this sword in honor," he said. "May it soon cleave goblins once again." How very true that we attach a lot of meaning and symbolism to objects and their significance in our history. So you can think of things that you own or that you've come across that have a special meaning to you or a special honor to you for what they've done in the past or what they have allowed people to accomplish. Okay, "A wish that is likely to be granted soon enough in the mountains," said Ellenrod. "But show me now your map." He took it and gazed long at it, and he shook his head. For if he did not altogether approve of dwarves and their love of gold, he hated dragons and their cruel wickedness, and he grieved to remember the ruin of the town of Dale and its merry bells and the burned banks of the bright river running. And river running is a name, it's capital R, river capital R, running. The moon was shining in a broad silver crescent. He held up the map, and the white light shone through it. "What is this?" he said. "There are moon letters here, beside the plain runes, which say 5 feet high the door, and 3 may walk abreast." "What are moon letters?" asked the Hobbit, full of excitement. He loved maps, as I have told you before, and he also liked runes and letters and cunning handwriting. Though when he wrote himself, it was a bit thin and spidery. "The moon letters are rune letters, but you cannot see them," said Ellenrod, "not when you look straight at them. They can only be seen when the moon shines behind them. And what is more, with the more cunning sort, it must be a moon of the same shape and season as the day when they were written. The dwarves invented them and wrote them with silver pens, as your friends could tell you. These must have been written on a midsummer's eve in a crescent moon a long while ago." "What do they say?" asked Gandalf and Thorin together, a bit vexed, perhaps, that even Ellenrod should have found this out first, though really there had not been a chance before, and there would not have been another until goodness knows when. "Stand by the grey stone when the thrush knocks," read Ellenrod, "and the setting sun with the last light of Durin's day will shine upon the keyhole." "Durin, said Thorin. "He was the father of the fathers of the eldest race of dwarves, the Longbeards, and my first ancestor. I am his heir. Then what is Durin's Day? Asked Ellenrod. The first day of the dwarves' New Year, said Thorin. As as all should know, the first day of the last moon of autumn on the threshold of winter. We still call it Durin's Day when the last moon of autumn and the sun are in the sky together. But this will not help us much, I fear, for it passes our skill in these days to guess when such a time will come again. That remains to be seen, said Gandalf. Is there any more writing? None to be seen by this moon, said Ellenrod, and he gave the map back to Thorin. And then they went down to the water to see the elves dance and sing upon the midsummer's eve. The next morning was a midsummer's morning, as fair and fresh as could be dreamed. Blue sky and never a cloud, and the sun was dancing on the water. Now they rode away amid songs of farewell and good speed, with their hearts ready for more adventure, and with a knowledge of the road they must follow over the misty mountains to the land beyond. So they have moon runes, and they have to match them up to a calendar day. That's a neat little world building thing. And if there is more writing, then they don't know it yet until they hold it up to the moon on a particular night. But they've just spent 2 weeks in just kind of the calm before the storm, regrouping. Okay, so we're 11 minutes into our 20 minutes. Remember, you need to just set your mind, condition your mind that you're going to read for 20 minutes, and it's a good, fun little chunk of time that you can kind of read a chunk of a story, but not too much, but a little bit to process it. So this is chapter 4, Over Hill and Under Hill. Okay. There were many paths that led up. Oh, I'm on page 64. And before I get into the next chapter, chapters are good places to stop and kind of reassess. I did look up the word heather, and I don't know why. Heather is kind of a purplish hue, unless you're talking about heather gray, which is kind of a muted gray. And parapet it's a pathway, a man-made pathway with a very low wall on either side of it, as kind of usually made out of stone. So they were walking along a pathway with no safety walls, which is why they were crawling. And then the color of the landscape was either kind of a purplish heather or kind of a gray barren heather. Okay, chapter 4. There were many paths that led up into those mountains, and many passes over them, but most of the paths were cheats and deceptions and led nowhere or to bad ends. And most of the passes were infested by evil things and dreadful dangers. The dwarves and the Hobbit, helped by the wise advice of Ellenrod and the knowledge and memory of Gandalf, took the right road to the right pass. Long days after they had climbed out of the valley and left the last homely house miles behind, they were still going up and up and up. It was a hard path and a dangerous path, a crooked way and a lonely and a long. Now they could look back over the lands they had left, laid out behind them, far below. Far, far away in the west, where things were blue and faint, Bilbo knew there lay his own country of safe and comfortable things, and his little hobbit hole. He shivered. It was getting bitter cold up here, and the wind came shrill among the rocks. Boulders, too, at times, came galloping down the mountain passes, let loose by midday's sun upon the snow, and passed among them, which was lucky, or over their heads, which was alarming. The nights were comfortless and chill, but they did not dare to sing or talk too loud, for the echoes were uncanny, and the silence seemed to dislike being broken, except by the noise of water and the wail of wind in the crack of stone. The summer is getting on down below, thought Bilbo, and haymaking is going on and picnics. There will be harvesting and blackberry picking before we even begin to go down the other side at this rate. And the others were thinking equally gloomy thoughts, although when they had said goodbye to Ellenrod in the high hope of a midsummer morning, they had spoken gaily of the passages of the mountains and of riding swift across the lands beyond. They had thought of coming to the secret door in the lonely mountain, perhaps that next first moon of autumn, and perhaps it will be Durin's day, they had said. Only Gandalf had shaken his head and said nothing. Dwarves have not passed that way for many years, but Gandalf had, and he knew how evil and danger had grown and thriven in the wild, since the dragons had driven men from the lands, and the goblins had spread in secret after the battle of the mines of Moria. Even the good plans of wise wizards like Gandalf and of good friends like Ellenrod go astray sometimes when you are off on dangerous adventures over the edge of the wild, and Gandalf was a wise enough wizard to know it. It's interesting to me that Gandalf has gone on all of these adventures by himself. He's quite capable and quite comfortable being alone, but for this adventure, of course, he's gathered together the 13 dwarves, and then Bilbo. He knew something unexpected might happen, and he hardly dared to hope that they would pass without fearful adventure over those great tall mountains with lonely peaks and valleys where no king ruled. They did not. All was well until one day they met a thunderstorm. More than a thunderstorm, a thunder battle. You know how terrific a really big thunderstorm can be down in the land and in a river valley, especially at times when two great thunderstorms meet and clash. More terrible still are thunder and lightning in the mountains at night, when storms come up from the east and west and make war. The lightning splinters on the peaks, and rocks shiver, and great crashes split the air and go rolling and tumbling into every cave and hollow, and the darkness is filled with overwhelming noise and sudden light. Bilbo had never seen or imagined anything of the kind. They were high up in a narrow place, with a dreadful fall into a dim valley at one side of them. There they were sheltering under a hanging rock for the night, and he lay beneath a blanket and shook from head to toe. When he peeped out in the lightning flashes, he saw that across the valley the stone giants were out and were hurling rocks at one another for a game, and catching them and tossing them down into the darkness, where they smashed among the trees far below, or splintered into little bits with a bang. Then came a wind and rain, and the wind whipped the rain and the hail about in every direction, so that an overhanging rock was no protection at all. Soon they were getting drenched, and their ponies were standing with their heads down and their tails between their legs, and some of them were whinnying with fright. They could hear the giants gawping and shouting all over the mountainsides. "This won't do at all," said Thorin. "If we don't get blown off or drowned or struck by lightning, we shall be picked up by some giant and kicked sky high for a football." "Well, if you know of anywhere better, take us there," said Gandalf, who was feeling very grumpy and was far from happy about the giants himself. At the end of their argument was that they sent Fili and Kili to look for a better shelter. They had very sharp eyes, and being the youngest of the dwarves by some 50 years, they usually got these sort of jobs, when everybody could see that it was absolutely no use sending Bilbo. There is nothing like looking if you want to find something, or so Thorin said to the young dwarves. You certainly usually find something if you look, but it is not always quite the something you were after. So it proved on this occasion. Soon Feely and Keely came crawling back, holding on to the rocks in the wind. "We have found a dry cave," they said, "not far round the next corner, and ponies and all could get inside." "Have you thoroughly explored it?" said the wizard, who knew that caves up in the mountains were seldom unoccupied. "Yes, yes," they said. So it's kind of like the mountains are the setting for a desert where every little seemingly tiny bit better section is occupied by something. "Yes, yes," they said, though everybody knew they could not have been long about it. They had come back too quick. "It isn't all that big, and it does not go far back." That, of course, is the dangerous part about caves. You don't know how far they go back, sometimes, or where a passage behind may lead to, or what is waiting for you inside. But now, Feely and Keely's news seemed good enough, so they all got up and prepared to move. The wind was howling and the thunder still growling, and they had a business getting themselves and their ponies along. Still, it was not very far to go, and before long they came to a big rock standing out into the path. If you stepped behind, you found a low arch in the side of the mountain. There was just room to get the ponies through with a squeeze. When they had been unpacked and unsaddled, as they passed under the arch, it was good to hear the wind and the rain outside instead of all about them, and to feel safe from the giants and their rocks. But the wizard was taking no risks. He lit up his wand as he did that day in Bilbo's dining room, that seemed so long ago, if you remember, and by its light, they explored the cave from end to end. So I'm a little bit over my 20 minutes. We're going to stop there. I am stopping on page 67 at the top, and I'm going to go get a little bit of shopping done.